her so much justice. Grandma, I'm excited to talk about her. Are you ready, Dad?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get this on the road. I'm excited. Welcome to Life at 2030. We're so excited to have you back. We have Dad here, we have John here, and we get to talk about my great grandma today. But before we do that, I want to ask my dad a quick one about a bus funny minute. You want to again?
Yeah, I'm always got one for the bus. Uh, Saturday before the 24th of July, I did the Centerville run. I ran from Salt Lake City to Centerville and back, and I'm on Orchard Drive, and I'm just past Valverda, which is an area in North Salt Lake, and I come up to a blockade in the middle of the road. And there's a guy standing there with a clipboard, and he looks up and sees me and just steps aside and motions me through. And there's people standing on either side of the road as far as I can see. And I pull forward about part way, and then I see these kids on bikes and little tractors with carts coming out of the parking lot. And a person looks up and sees me, looks down on their clipboard, and realizes that I'm not supposed to be in the parade. It's a children's parade, and
Here's a big jolly bus.
so the guy walks up to me and he says, "Well, I can't get you out of here. You're going to have to be in the parade." And he says, "Here, I got a good idea." So he hands me two big boxes of saltwater taffy, and he says, "Have your passengers throw them out the window."
That's
The
awesome.
problem is I'm only going like a fourth of a mile an hour, and I have a schedule to keep. So I called my dispatcher and I said, "I'm stuck in a children's parade and they've given me boxes of candy. Is it okay if I have the passengers throw them out the windows?" And they said, "Yeah, where are you?" And I told them where I was at. And about 5 minutes later, two supervisors showed up in their cars and were taking pictures of me in the parade. And I threw a couple of handfuls of candy at them, and
Softly, right?
softly. And the people on the bus had such a fun time throwing candy out the windows to the people. And I was about 15 minutes late getting to town, but the people didn't mind, and it was a good experience and free advertising for UTA.
That is the funniest. I wonder if I bet you that hasn't happened with another bus.
No, the guy should have never let me through. He was making all traffic turn, but when he saw a bus, I guess he didn't know whether I was part of the parade or not. And I didn't know the parade was there, and no one at UTA had warned me about it, and they didn't know about it.
That's amazing.
See, people are supposed to give UTA notice when they're going to block a road that the buses are on, but that doesn't happen all the time.
Hey, there's something that happened with Grandma Hawley with the bus. Do you want to talk about that since we're
You mean her
talking?
and Aunt Neon?
Yeah.
Her and Aunt Neon decided they wanted to take the bus to Provo to the temple. And so they got the schedules and they went and waited for the bus. And by the time the bus got them to the temple, it was time to come home. So they just ate lunch and then took the bus home and never made it to the temple, actually. But they had a great bus ride and they had a good time.
And they had a good story for the rest
And
of
they
their
had a
lives.
great story to tell for a long time.
Oh, I love that. I would have loved to have been a fly on that bus.
That would have been fun to be there with them.
Neon, we're not going to make it in time. Cutest ladies ever on this planet to exist. Would you agree,
I
Grandma?
would. Those two were amazing.
That's why I'm so excited to talk about my grandma Hawley. So your grandma, but my great grandma,
Right.
and her name is Stella Ann Cahoon Carling Hawley. I remember her telling me with that with so much pride, just saying, "Here is my very long name." So she was raised by some very amazing people, and I wanted you to tell us about Harriet and Hiram Cahoon.
Hiram
right?
Styles Cahoon, yeah.
That's a cool name.
Yeah. Grandma and Grandpa, I was pretty young when they were alive, and Grandma Cahoon died while I was young, and Grandpa came and lived with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. And I was out playing with some pollywogs, and he told me that if I kept playing with pollywogs, I'd lose all my hair. So, but it was fun to watch the pollywogs grow up into frogs in the little ponds, and they had a little tiny house on Main Street in Deseret.
Which I would love to see one day.
And we grew up on the same street for a couple of years. My dad and his siblings lived with the Cahoons. And, a nice little quiet street in southern Utah. And
I think the story really tells who Grandpa Cahoon was about the outhouse.
yeah, the outhouse is there. All outhouses were in the backyard. And at Halloween time, the kids were pretty mean. They would scoot the outhouses back 5 or 6 feet and cover the hole with sticks and leaves. So during Halloween, if you weren't conscious or you were just willy-nilly walking to the outhouse, you could fall in the hole. So you had to watch what was going on with the kids back then.
Even the moms and dads had to remember.
Yes, everybody had to remember. But my dad said that when he was younger, him and a couple of his friends were sitting in the outhouse smoking bark. And my Grandpa Cahoon had a 5-gallon metal bucket, and he filled it with water. And he opened the door to the outhouse, and he threw the water in, and he said, "Oh, I thought the outhouse was on fire." and shut the door and walked away. And this was in the middle of December.
That would have been pretty smoky, right?
Yes, bark would smoke, yeah.
Did they not realize that he would have noticed that?
They were kids. They're stupid. They don't know.
That is a kid for you. They had 4 kids, right? Grandma Hawley, Neon, and then Alpha, and they had a brother, right?
Yeah, they had a brother.
Okay, so there were 4.
I didn't really know anyone but Neon.
Yeah, we didn't know. What was the brother's name?
I don't remember.
I know. I need to look that up. I apologize for not knowing that off of
As a kid, you don't, even growing up, if you don't see them, they don't exist.
So it was Neon that had Hawley K.
You're right. Neon lived in Sutherland, so we knew they always lived together.
And Neon lived pretty close to Grandma Hawley.
Yeah, it was maybe 6-7 miles away.
That's awesome that they were so close. So when I was trying to kind of write a memoir of the Cahoons, which, I know a lot of details, but just offhand, without looking at what I've written, I don't remember, except I was researching Alpha. And Alpha, when she was a baby, she had
encephalitis.
Yes, she had encephalitis, and she had meningitis,
spinal meningitis
that caused a lot of problems in her life. And they didn't have a picture of her or anything, and so she was viewed as handicapped, and she was in the Valley Mental Health
I didn't know she existed till you researched her.
Really?
No one ever said anything about Alpha. No one.
I would ask questions to Grandpa Carling and Aunt Marlena, who are, you'll find out, they're Grandma Holly's kids. We'll explain a little more. I asked them so many questions, and so I was like, I want to research this mystery. So I called Utah Valley Hospital, or the Provo Hospital, that's what it was called before. And they sent me an inch worth of paperwork on her. And it was so incredible to find out all I could about her, and to have a picture, and to find out when Grandpa Cahoon entered her into the hospital, he had to write a lot of paperwork or fill out a lot of stuff. And there's one thing that he wrote down that told me exactly how they were, as how they raised their kids, how they were as people. And the question was, how do you, with your child, how do I say it? How do you my mind.
What's left of
Not
it?
not punish a child, but just how do you rear your children, or
Right.
how do you, if they're in trouble, how do you react to them? Sorry, that was, oh wow.
How do you discipline your child?
Yes. Obviously, my brain is mush right now, but it will come back. The question was, how do you discipline at home? Thank you, Dad. And how Hiram answered it was no whipping, but kindness. And that was them. And that is my favorite thing that I learned about them. And that alone makes me want to know them more. And do
Yep.
you think that that's how they were?
Yeah. They really small house, but they were the sweetest old people I ever met. And they were pretty old when I first got to know them.
And they didn't want much. They just were
No,
farmers.
they were content. They were farmers.
They did everything they could for their kids. So Grandma Hawley, she got married, and she met this guy in Fillmore, thought he was pretty cute, and got married, had 3 kids. She had Robert, which is your dad, and then Dale and Marlena. And they were maybe a couple years apart between each kid.
2 or 3 each.
And so when your dad was 12, they went to, do you want to tell that story, or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
When Grandpa Carling was 12, they went to stay with the Cahoons for the summer, and they were so excited to get to be with their grandparents in such a loving, kind home. And the end of summer came, and they were watching for their dad to come, because he had gone to California to shoe horses and ferry horses, I think that's what it's called. And he was going to come collect them at the end of summer, and they were going to go back to their house in Salt Lake and just continue on with their lives. And end of summer came, and he never came back. And that was really hard on all of them. And I know that your dad's talked about that a lot, and how angry he was that his dad never came back, and they didn't see him for years and years after
No,
that.
he left my grandma for another woman, and Grandma Linny.
Did you ever meet her?
A couple of times. My dad wasn't amenable to them coming around us. My dad said that if he ever saw him, he would probably kill him. And I don't know the whole situation, and Dad never talked about it. But something would have made him angry, and things that happened subsequent to this, and everyone having to go to work. And
Well, and at that time, the Cahoons, they really needed help. They were getting older.
Yeah.
They needed Grandpa Carling and his brother Dale to come and help milk the cows and set those big gallons of milk at the edge of the road for the trucks to come and pick up. And Grandma Hawley, in the 40s, that's something that was really kind of unheard of. You didn't get divorced, and you didn't talk about it, right?
right.
And that's a memory that Marlena says, I don't remember my mom ever talking about it. So what Grandma did is she looked around, had her 3 kids with her parents, living in a small house with the piano. You said, I've never heard that they had a piano, and that's pretty neat. Grandma pushed up her sleeves, and she got 3 jobs and tried her best to support her kids for the next 4 or 5 years. And then she met one of the most incredible men ever, and they met he asked her out to a dance. This is Fawn Hawley, and they ended up getting married, and he was the best thing that ever happened to her. But
Yep.
he always said she was the best thing that happened to him. I feel like this was such a great experience for them to have, to be able to meet, because I asked Marlena the other day, what if Grandma had never had a divorce? What if Leland came back at the end of summer and they went back? And Marlena said that would have just been the worst thing for any of us, because Grandpa Hawley was just this amazing guy, and Grandma Hawley was this amazing woman, and they came together, and what a cool story. And
All our lives would have been different.
they really would have.
The way that Grandpa Lee lived his life was not the way that was compatible with the way they were raised. And
Yeah, and he really got along with Dale very well because they both liked horses. But
They both loved rodeos and stuff.
he just couldn't get along with your dad very well, and that would have been really hard for your dad. He would have been very different if he didn't have your grandma and grandpa Cahoon to rally around him, and his warrior mom to rally around him as well, and to just show I can work and work very hard and get through a very difficult situation, and here's how. And I think that I just think that things that happen in this life are meant to be. Grandma Hawley was supposed to be with Grandpa Hawley.
Well, when you hear about the way life was when she first married Grandpa, I mean, back then, maybe it was before she married Grandpa.
Which Grandpa?
Well, but she often talked about how the whole day was preparing meals for the farmhands.
Yes.
So she got up, prepared breakfast for all the farmhands. She said there were a lot of them. And the minute breakfast was over, they started preparing lunch for the farmhands. So her whole day was cooking for the farmhands to support the farm.
Yeah, with her mom. And she said as soon as they would finish cooking meals, they would do the dishes and start on the next meal, because they gave them hearty meals.
Yeah.
Because they were the threshers. Is that how you say it? The threshers? Right. Because they would come and harvest everything. And that took weeks.
And it was they weren't hungry man meals. They were hungry man meals.
I like that you
biscuits
brought that
and
up.
Meat and gravy
And Grandma Cahoon taught Grandma Hawley how to make mile-high baking powder biscuits. I wish I had that recipe. But Grandpa Carling would always talk about
Hardee's probably has it. They make the best biscuits I know.
They got her recipe.
They must have her recipe.
But Grandpa Carling would talk about how Grandma Cahoon would get the night cream. She would skim off the top of the milk and get the richest, creamiest milk and use that for her biscuits.
Right.
And they were kind of poor farmers too, but they worked hard. And I
remember churning butter.
That's pretty cool. And a big old thing that they
had. Big old wooden churn, yeah, and you had to beat it up and down until it got so hard you couldn't move it, and then it became butter.
Grandpa Carling used to say that Grandma Cahoon would say, "Robert, I want you to go shoot me a ring-necked rabbit," which meant what, Dad?
A pheasant.
Because those were regulated how many the farmers could actually go shoot.
Right.
And so she would call it a ring-necked rabbit, so that Grandpa knew exactly what she was talking about.
I loved hunting ring-necked rabbits.
I bet those were the best. And she cooked them very good, I heard. And so Grandma Hawley learned from some very hardworking, loving, kind parents. And she was that way too. And in the right environment, she was able to do that with her kids, to be loving and kind. And so Grandma met Grandpa Hawley. They moved in with his mom for the next year and a half. Marlena moved in with Grandma and Grandpa Hawley. And your dad and Dale stayed back with the Cahoons. Why did they do that?
I don't know. My dad never said. He said he felt comfortable there, and he felt they needed help.
And they probably really did need
help. And it
help.
was closer to school, because they all went to Hinckley High, which wasn't in Delta, it was in Hinckley, which was closer to Deseret than it was to Oasis. So they probably stayed there because it was closer to school.
And then your dad met your mom and got married
from Hinckley High. Yeah.
And while all of this was happening, when Grandma Hawley was abandoned with the kids, Grandma and Grandpa Cahoon were supporting Alpha in the hospital, and they were paying $50 a month so that she could get the care that she needed, because she had a really big head, not like literally.
Encephalitis causes that, yeah.
And
fluid retention in the head.
Yeah, and she actually thrived pretty well.
Which is easily fixed now.
Yeah.
She didn't have to live that life, but because they didn't know any better, she did.
Yeah, they didn't know any of the procedures that they do now that would have easily kept her out of the Utah State Hospital. And she was just such a sweetheart and made a lot of friends and loved to read romance novels. And so the Cahoons had such a lot of huge thing. Sorry, I can talk. They had so many things happening in their lives. They have 5 extra people living with them, but because they were on a farm, they could easily support them and feed them that way. And that is such a cool thing. Nowadays, you don't have nearly as many farms and you can't just live off of your land, right?
Right.
Wish we could. So we have Grandma who met this amazing guy.
I mean, my grandpa couldn't even support himself with the farm. He went to work at the seed plant, Grandpa Hawley. He worked at the seed plant for a lot of years to augment the farm.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yep.
And then Grandma would work at D. Stevens. And
Right.
then Marlena said that she remembers Marlena always had really nice name brand clothes. And looking back, she says, I don't know how Mom did that. And I said, I wonder if she put you in the best clothes possible to say, look, I did it. I could do this. I could support my family. I could support anything that they needed. And she was right there, just this hardworking woman.
Well, she was her only daughter, and only daughters get spoiled.
That's true, too. I
Oh,
love that.
man. Sorry, Chris, but it's true.
Daughters need to be spoiled, except when your brothers would babysit Marlena. Was she spoiled then?
Yeah, well, my dad used to tell me about tending Aunt Marlene at my grandpa's farm. And he says Uncle Dale and I didn't want to tend her. And there was a shed next to the house that had a basement in it. It was a cold storage area. And we used to kindle eggs down there. Candling eggs means you put the egg up to a light and turn it and make sure there's no blood in the egg. So that all eggs that are sold at stores are candled either electronically or to make sure there's no blood inside the egg, or that the egg doesn't have an embryo in it. You don't want to open your egg and have a baby chick fall out. Ugh. But so that's where we used to store the eggs, and then cases at a time a guy would come and pick up. But down in that cold room, it had a big thick door on it. It had a window and a lot of things to play with down there. And so my dad and Uncle Dale used to put Aunt Marlena down in the cold storage shelter, and then let the goat loose. And if Aunt Marlena would try to come out of there, the goat would butt her. So she would playfully play down there until my dad and Dale knew that Mom, Grandma, and Grandpa were coming back. And then they would tie the goat up and let Aunt Marlena out and tend her for 5 minutes.
Oh, see, we did such a good job. Oh.
So poor Aunt Marlena. I'm sorry, Aunt Marlena.
I'm so grateful she's been very patient with all the times I've called her and just asked her so many questions. And I'm grateful that she has so many things to tell, and she's had a lot happen to her too. So we have, let's see, where are we going? Grandma was such a good cook too. She learned as a kid, and when we would go visit them, that was our favorite thing, was
muffins. Oh,
everything she made. Oh, her signature brand muffins with her strawberry peach jam.
Peach jam.
And it had to be a warm muffin with butter melted on it, and then you put the jam. And every time I make that and take my first bite, I'm at their kitchen table.
But Grandpa would put them in a bowl and want you to pour milk or Sprite over them.
We could not sit by Grandpa at the breakfast
No,
table.
it was hard to sit by Grandpa because the things he ate were bizarre.
And Grandma made these chocolate chip cookies. That's when I first realized I loved her as a grandma, because people her age would make cookies with raisins. And she made hers with chocolate chips. And I thought, you are the best person in this planet because you bring us these amazing cookies. And I tried to make them one day, and I couldn't get them right, because she would put them in a 1-gallon ice cream bucket and put them in layers with the wax paper. And then she'd put them in the freezer, because she would make them beforehand, so many. And I don't think she realized she was making
such
make
a
signature
dozens
cookie.
And dozens and dozens.
So many. I would love to look in their freezer and see how many she had in there. Sometimes there were a lot, and I was tempted to take some, but I would never. She would know.
She would know. Grandma would know.
And so when I tried to make these cookies, I took a bite and I was like, oh, they don't taste the same. They don't stick to my fingers. They're just odd. They're not fluffy. And I thought, wait a minute, you've got to do it how she did and put them in the freezer. And I was like, there's no way. But they worked out. That was the neatest thing ever.
As soon as you put them in the freezer, they become soft.
And a couple of years after she had passed away, I mean, I guess people thought I was playing a trick. I made a gallon bucket of cookies and took them to a family Christmas party, and everyone thought that they had been left behind in one of her old freezers or something. I said, no, we figured out how to make them, and here's the recipe.
We all thought that it was the lost batch.
I loved all the things. And what was the one thing that Grandma could not resist?
Ice cream. We'll eat ice cream today and we'll diet tomorrow.
I think she taught me to love it so much.
And my son James just told us a story that made us laugh.
I know, you need to tell it.
Why don't you tell it? Or I can tell it. It don't matter.
I've been talking so much.
We were just to my son James's. My grandson was baptized yesterday, and Grant. Congratulations, Grant. We were in Cedar City, Enoch, actually. And my son said that when he was staying for a couple of weeks in the summer with Grandma and Grandpa, Grandpa didn't go to church because he wasn't feeling well. So Grandma and Jim went to church, and after church, they drove to Aunt Naon's house to talk to Aunt Naon. Because usually on Sundays, we would go over to Aunt Naon and Uncle Eugene's house and chat for a while and have some cookies. And so then on the way home, instead of going home on Sunday, Grandma went over the viaduct to the store and gave James $10 and said, James, go in and buy some ice cream, whatever you want. And Jim said, well, it's Sunday. And Grandma says, well, just go ahead and go in.
I need ice cream.
I need ice cream. So Jim went in and bought banana cream or something.
Banana split.
Banana split ice cream and some other. And so Jim said, well, Grandpa's going to know we bought it on Sunday. And Grandma says, Grandpa won't know. So when they walked in, Grandpa was just sitting at the table. They put the ice cream in the freezer. And Jim said, a little later, we probably had some ice cream. And Grandpa never knew that we bought it on Sunday. So that kind of made us laugh. And she said, don't tell Grandpa. Sometimes Grandma would give you $1 and say, don't tell Grandpa. And then Grandpa'd give you $1 and say, don't tell Grandma.
Yeah, and the funny thing is Jim said no one was in the store except him. Grandma knew that someone would, or the clerks would be like, you're here? What?
Stella, what are you doing here on Sunday?
It's in the town paper the next day.
That's what I loved about that town paper. We'd get there and they'd say, Paul and Melvin, the kids came to visit the Hawleys this week. I mean, that's really lacking in a newspaper when those were the stories.
Oh, I love that. We loved, I mean, when you talk about Grandma, you can't just not talk about everybody else. Grandpa and all the kids that they raised and everything. And the cool thing is
because Grandma was all about everybody else.
She was. She really was. She really, even till the last time I visited with her, she asked about everybody. How are they doing? You know, send my love. And Grandpa, he loved having an instant family. And he worked so hard to take care of them. And when your dad and Dale weren't living with them, Grandpa Hawley would reach out to them to go fishing and really just try to be that father figure in their life that they didn't have. And I mean, apart from Grandpa Cahoon as well. And so what a magical time for them to be surrounded by such amazing men that were such a great example to them. And I would say the same for Grandma Hawley. What an amazing time for her to have Grandpa Hawley, who would tell her, Stella, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you gave me an instant family. And you knew he meant that. And we do have more stories about Grandma and everything, but I want to take a minute and talk about that magical phrase, because it just hit me that Grandpa was telling us what the secret in life is. Because when, like your wife and my mom, when she talks about Grandpa Hawley, that is the first thing she says with the biggest smile on her face. I love how he said that to Grandma. And it just made Mom feel it and know it. And we all want people to say that about us in our lives. And how do you think that changed Grandma?
she felt loved and cared for when the only thing she knew about us men was rejection.
Yeah.
And Grandpa was such a blessing in all our lives. We would not be the same.
There's no way. I mean, what
I
a
mean, he was the
blessing.
most patient guy I ever met.
Seriously, and he didn't have a mean bone in his body.
No, nothing bothered him.
So he was the perfect
Unless
person.
the meat store was out of jerky.
How did he like that jerky, by the way? That was like so paper thin.
That was the paper thin, hardest jerky, but it had flavor if you soaked it in your mouth about 10 minutes.
It did, and I made John try some once. I think we went and bought some, and you said, "How do you guys like this?" Well, it reminds us of Grandpa.
Well, but he could always keep 2 or 3 chunks of it in his pocket because nothing was going to absorb into it.
I think God knew that Grandma Hawley at that point, because she went 5 years without, just staying at her parents' house. She was with raising her kids, and along comes the most unassuming man ever, just full of love and loved her to pieces. He just loved her.
Yep.
And was so patient with her and let her be exactly how she was, which was perfect as well in my eyes. And so I just wrote a little thing about the best thing that ever happened to me and what that does to people. When you delve into the importance of that phrase and say it to your spouse and your kids, even about your job, about your religion, about anything, if you say that's the best thing that ever happened to me, how does that make you feel, Dad?
Wonderful.
It's like you want more, right?
Yeah.
So when you believe it and say it, you love and appreciate these people and these experiences even more. And these people around you want to try harder to live up to what you're saying. And I feel that was Grandma Hawley trying to live up even more to what Grandpa.
We all tried to live up to what Grandpa said.
We did.
If you're the best thing in his life, you better be good.
Yeah, it makes you want to be better.
Right.
And so when I find myself saying that to my kids and my husband, it makes me feel happier too, because it makes me realize how blessed I am. So it goes both ways. And Grandpa didn't even realize he knew the magic of how to make a relationship work. And that's what it is. And even if you have a hard circumstance that you go through, you can say that's the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was meant to be a lesson for you. And what did you learn from it? So do you think that Grandma and Grandpa Hawley were couple goals?
Were couple goals?
That's the saying and the phrase these days. Your couple goals.
I don't know. Mom's goals sometimes were different than mine. I mean, my goals were to keep a roof over my kids' and family's head and food on the table and to let them know that they were loved and cared for. But that goal put you out of the house more than it put you in the house.
Yeah.
So my goals were to come home and not kill them all.
You succeeded.
Yeah, but my wife's goals were totally different than mine. But our ultimate goal was to bring our family back to our Heavenly Father. And that was the common goal we had.
Yeah.
To let our kids know that we love them. But more importantly, I have a plaque in my house that says the best thing you can do for your children is to love their mother.
I love that.
And so I try to do that all the time, to let their mother know that I love her.
And you had some of the greatest examples in your life showing you that. I think it was so cute when the last weekend that Grandma and Grandpa were going to be in their house in Oasis, I went and took pictures of everything I could think of. And I said, Grandma and Grandpa, I want to take a picture of you. And Grandpa was sitting in that vinyl kitchen chair. And he says, come here, Stella. And he pats his lap, and she comes and sits on his lap. And I have that picture. They are the cutest couple. Oh my gosh. I want to be more like them and more like you and Mom. And just, I'm so grateful for the examples that we've had in our lives. And I was so glad that they got to move up to Bountiful because they were closer to us. And so we didn't have to make this huge plan to go and stay, which I did miss staying with them for a week or a weekend.
Yeah, I went through withdrawals not being there, going to Delta.
You must have, because that was really where we wanted to go, and we visited it.
I mean, that's where we went on vacation.
Yeah, and it was so fun there. So I had a class up in Bountiful for the summer, and every weekend every Friday I would go after my class and pick up Grandma and take her shopping. She loved shopping, and sometimes we would go shop at a clothing store, and she was so respectful and kind. Like, she would even put Kleenex and tissues around the collar so she wouldn't get any makeup on the shirt that she was trying on, and because she worked at a clothing store at D. Stevens, and she knew what people could do to clothes. And we would go grocery shopping, and she always made sure to buy me lunch, and we'd go back to her little apartment, and just that's when she would ask how everybody was doing. And I wish if I could go back in time, just ask her, how did you make it through all of these hard times? But she showed through action. She just pushed her sleeves up and she worked hard, and she loved everyone with all she had. And she was
never hateful about those times.
No, she wasn't. I know Marlena said there was only one time Grandma ever got really, really mad at her ex-husband. It was when he showed up to Marlena's wedding and walked up to Grandma and said, "You did a really good job raising our children." And Grandma got really mad at that, thinking, how can you claim these children as yours, But she got past that pretty quick, and that was it. What an example. There's a lot that we can take from that.
And my dad got over it when he had to pay to bury Grandpa.
That was hard for him, too. Yeah.
He wanted him dead, and then he had to bury him.
Yeah. Oh, no. That's pretty hard. The last time that I will allow myself to remember seeing Grandma, well, there was a time
we won't talk about the last time we saw her.
The last time I saw her that she was lucid, Sherry and I went with Sam and John. They were really little. We brought her balloons. She was in the hospital. She was only in the hospital for like a week before she passed away. Not much longer,
yeah. It was quick.
And I think that was pretty neat that she had her mind the entire time. And we had the funnest visit, and Grandma was just Grandma. We just didn't want to leave, and I remember turning and waving at her and wondering if that was the last time I was going to see her, and it wasn't.
You wish it was the last time you saw her.
Yes, I definitely agree, because she was a very special woman in my life. She would call me at work, and we would talk for hours. I won't tell you where I was working at the time, but we would just talk, and she was so interested in all of us.
Must have been Hinkley Dodge.
It was. We didn't have a lot going on there, and there's just so many fun memories. And I know that Grandma had things just so, but one of the most endearing memories that I had of her, how she had very particular, she would put toilet paper
around her hair, yeah.
And pin it to her hair so that and she would sleep on her back very still so that she wouldn't mess up her hair, because she only went on Thursdays to get her hair done, or Fridays, something like that.
Fridays, I think it was.
And so Grandma, I remember just wanting to brush her hair so bad as a kid. And I said, "Grandma, can I brush your hair?" And she was like, "Well, that was a big deal because of how she pinned it up and everything." And she was like, "You know what? I'm going to the hairdresser tomorrow." And we were watching the news. That was our routine when we would stay in Delta. I brushed her hair for 2 hours. Just brushed it, and you could just tell she was in heaven. And I thought that was so special, because I'm like, yay, I get to brush Grandma's hair.
I never touched Grandma's hair. I was afraid.
That was the coolest memory ever. And then there was one other time I got to do that as well, when she was at Riley Court, and because the next day she was going to the hairdresser, and I brushed her hair, I rubbed lotion on her feet, I trimmed her toenails. I just really wanted to show her, you're so special to me. And that was there's some special moments that you can have with people. I love the connection that you can have. And I know that you connected with her. Is there anything that do you just remember the feeling that you felt?
Yeah, just being there. It was always love. Absolutely. I connected to Grandpa more because I helped him more around the farm. I didn't do much in the kitchen. Grandma would shoo me into the living
Yeah,
room.
she wouldn't let you.
No. If you're going to be in here, sit on the stool.
Come
Stay
talk
out of
with
the
me.
way.
What do you think?
I didn't associate with Grandma. I did with Grandpa. Fixing tractors, repairing roofs. Those were the kids that a boy did, the things.
Yeah, and I would always just watch her in the kitchen, and she taught me how to play solitaire, but she said, don't play it for money. Don't gamble. But she seemed to teach me so much, and I am so grateful I have her recipes and I make her stuff, and that's how I connect with her. And so I see how that is, we need certain people in our lives for sure. And you just knew that Grandma loved you.
Right.
And so I feel like the essence of her was just complete love and just concern and care for people. Would you agree?
I agree.
Do you have anything to add to that?
It never was about her. I mean, I used to love to hear her on the chat line on the telephone.
Explain that.
Well, they used to have 4 or 5 families were on the same line. You didn't have separate lines. What do they call it? Party line. So sometimes I'd pick up the phone to make a call to Mom and Dad, and there'd be 2 old ladies talking. It was irresistible not to listen in.
Oh, I bet.
And sometimes I'd bust out laughing, and they're like, Mabel, is somebody else on the line? And sometimes Grandma would be sitting there talking, and she'd go, who else is on the line? Who's on the line?
That is so funny.
So it was hard to keep a secret back with party lines.
Oh, I bet.
But if I saw Grandma just listening in, I just went the other way and walked out of the room.
I agree. Is there anything that always reminds you of her? Like if you see a certain thing or smell a certain thing or...
Not really. I mean, nothing really reminds me of Grandma. It's just a feeling.
Yeah.
Muffins. If I ever have a muffin, or the jam that Mom makes, the strawberry peach jam. When I have that, I remember Grandma. Sometimes if I have bacon for breakfast, I'll remember the breakfast there.
Oh, bacon every time reminds me of their house.
Or
every time.
I mean, sometimes there are things that remind me, like if I'm in Bountiful and I pass Riley Court.
Oh, yeah.
But the last few years, my mind has been on my mom and dad and their struggles, and so
Yeah, which I can't wait to
the
talk
memories
with you
in
about.
my head are trying to remember them
Yeah.
as opposed to remembering Grandma and Grandpa.
Because they were just always there. And so you think that they'll always be there. There's so many times that Grandma just pops up in my mind. And when I was having my 3rd child, the room cleared out. John went to get something. The nurse was gone. I was alone. And Eli at that point was turning in my stomach. And I was having some very uncomfortable pressure just going, what's happening? Even though I already had 2 kids. And I was getting a little scared, and I think I said a little prayer just like, I need some comfort. And I kid you not, I heard Grandma Hawley say, hi, Julie. But in her way, hi, Julie. Just like that. And I realized I'm not alone. She's here. Of course she's here. And then it felt like the room just got filled with so many people, even though no one was in there but me and a baby rolling in my stomach. And that was really special. And I was sad that she had passed away.
The baby Roland was just telling everybody on the other side goodbye.
Come on, I'm going. When I went through the temple for the first time, that was really cool that Grandma and Grandpa Carling were there. But I was sad because I wanted Grandma Hawley there. She'd passed away a year before. And when I went up to finish the session, this old lady who was a temple worker turned around to extend her hand to me. And for a flash, it was Grandma Hawley's face. And I was like, she's here. Wow. It was amazing. And Grandpa Carling made it so fun because Donnie Osmond was in that session. And he went and found Donnie Osmond and said, this is your special day because you're with my granddaughter. He chased him down to say that, and I was like, Grandpa, that poor guy can't
You're
find
never going to
peace.
have a day like this. You're with my granddaughter.
He chased him down just to say that. So it's just, there's times that I'll just be having a hard time in my life, and I'll have dreams, and Grandma Hawley's in them. She's so close. So I'm sorry that you didn't get.
I love Grandma Hawley, but the connection was with Grandpa for me.
Yep, and you needed that connection with Grandpa. You absolutely did.
I did.
And the things that he taught you, and so
I'm not saying I don't have a connection with Grandma. It's just not the same.
Oh, I know. Absolutely you have a connection with her. I wanted to read this word for word what Aunt Marlena said, because, and maybe I said this earlier. I said to Aunt Marlena, what if your mom never met Grandpa Hawley, and what if she never got a divorce? And Marlena said, well, that would have been too bad for all of us. And I fully agree with that. And we would have never met Grandpa Hawley, and things would have just never been the same. And what an incredible history and family that we have, because Grandma Hawley was in our lives, and she brought Grandpa Hawley. And I know that they slept in separate bedrooms and everything.
Well, that was the last part of their life. Yeah, Grandpa liked all the windows open, and Grandma didn't.
What a fun couple.
And we just heard a story about their wedding.
Oh!
You better tell it.
Aunt Marlena, I hope you don't mind me telling this. This was so funny. None of us had heard this whatsoever. I mean, people just didn't talk a lot, right? And I'm sure Grandpa didn't care if we knew this or what. But Aunt Marlena said the day that they went to Salt Lake to go get married, which I was like,
we don't know if they got married in the temple or civilly, because everyone went to Salt Lake to get married.
Yeah, so maybe they just had to go get their
maybe
wedding
that's where the courthouse was,
and had to get married there first. And so Marlena said that Grandpa Hawley said that was the last day he smoked his last cigarette. Was when they drove to get married in Salt Lake. And I told that to Jim yesterday, and his jaw hit the ground. What? And when we told Sherry that, she said, that makes me like him even more. I miss those guys. If you could spend one day with them right now, what would you even do?
I'd just sit down and talk with them.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of questions I have.
Isn't that interesting? How many more questions?
When we start thinking about them, there's questions that I have.
It's so true. I miss these people so much. But I'm so glad we have the memories of them. How do you sum up somebody's life in less than an hour? It's so hard to just bring in every detail.
You look at the people they left behind and how they are.
And we hope that we're good enough, right? Yeah, there's a lot of times. Grandma was such a good example to me. There was a time that I went to get her prescription, and I was just in a hurry because I wanted to get back and visit with her. And when I grabbed the change really quick from the pharmacist and ran to my car and sat down and ripped my pants open, the behind end. And I thought, oh, I'm glad that happened now instead of in the store. And then I thought, you know what? The change they gave me seemed like quite a bit, because I paid with the 20 and they handed me all these bills and I shoved it in my pocket. So I looked, I just had a feeling, and there was like 50, 60 bucks in my hand. And I'm like, how did that happen? So I knew I had to go run back in and return the change, because that's something Grandma would have made me do. And you and Mom would have said, no, go take it back. I knew by then that's something that needed to happen. So I looked around, found a jacket, tied it around my waist so I didn't have this really big rip showing in my jeans, and went and gave the change back. And there was a little old lady that was saying, I promise you didn't give me the right change. And I was so glad to give her that money back that was rightfully hers, and got to go tell Grandma that story, and handed her some yellow roses because those were her favorite. And just when you're raised by people like that, then how can you not really be a good person in this life, And I'm just grateful for our ancestors and for all that we've learned from all of them. So
it wasn't what they said or what they did, it was their example.
Yeah.
you knew exactly what they were going to do in a situation.
Except if they needed ice cream on a Sunday.
But they always surprise us. There's that time when they surprise you.
You just have this biological urge to get ice cream, right?
Like Grandpa with the 100-year-old Scotch whiskey.
Oh, man.
Who knew that was such a good cough medicine?
Oh, Dad, I really hope that we at least begin to paint a good picture of these two, because I wanted to talk about Grandpa Hawley and Grandma Hawley, so then we can talk about Delta and how amazing our trips were there.
Oh.
So that one is coming up.
That's 2 or 3 podcasts there.
Oh, it could be easily. Such a magical place for all of us, and it was a place for us to regroup and really just...
And Dale's kids and Marlena's kids all love Delta.
Yeah. What a cool gathering
Good place to hunt and fish.
And I have to tell you, 3-4 years ago, I made John drive the kids and I to Delta so we could see the farmhouse, because that's a long story too. Grandma and Grandpa could stay in the house as long as they were alive, and Grandpa outlived all of his siblings. That's pretty hilarious. And we don't really know his family very well. That's sad that we don't, but we don't. And so John and I drive by, and the house was for sale. They had whittled it down to 3 acres. I don't know how many it was when they...
240.
Wow.
When Grandpa... He said he had over 1,800 acres to begin with, but his father gambled and lost a lot of it.
Oh, so
sad.
So
Grandpa Hawley's father was a gambler.
I'm glad they could hold on to the 240 acres. So by the time we saw it for sale, they had whittled it to 3 acres. The barn was gone. There's a house that's replaced it, which is so sad.
I know.
And the guy that currently has it is trying to refurbish it. I've sent pictures to try to show them how it was before. I wanted to buy that house so bad. I was calling everybody, we need to buy this, and it just wasn't right. And it's so sad, but
it's not, it's just a piece of property. It's not Grandma and Grandpa.
You're so right. I'm so glad you brought that up, because as soon as they were gone, anytime we went to visit that house, it never felt like...
I mean, my parents' house is just a piece of property.
Yep.
I didn't want to buy it because it was nothing without Mom and Dad there.
And Delta and Oasis is nothing. It's not the same without them.
It's just a memory. It's a place.
And so that shows how wonderful people are. And just that I'm so glad we have memories and that we can talk about it. So I'm glad that you guys were patient with us today. Thank you for being patient with all the questions, Dad, and the listeners, and just exploring
Thanks for making
more.
The questions.
I'm so glad to know more about these wonderful people that we have their blood running through our veins. Not Grandpa Hawley's, I wish.
Oh, we have his blood running through our veins, no doubt about it.
We have his alcohol running through our veins.
We're sealed to him. We're sealed to him, so...
Definitely are, and I'm so glad. And yeah, these podcasts, these ones especially about our great-grandparents and grandparents, are definitely for our posterity, and we're just glad that you guys have stuck around for the ride. So there will be more to come with this, and more funny bus moments and more everything. So thanks for joining us today, and can't wait to talk to you again. See you later.
Have a good day.